Welcome back to the Ruy Lopez Masterclass. Today we are talking about the Cozio Defense, and we're tackling this one. We're going to take a look at how, as a white, you can put the most pressure and gain the best positions against the Cozio Defense, which is this move here, knight g to e7. Now, if you turn on the engine in this position, it will give the following moves: knight c3, d4, and castles as white's best options. I'm recommending a fourth move, which is this one here, the move c3. And the engine doesn't particularly love this. I mean, white retains some edge, of course, but it much prefers the first three options. So why am I recommending this anyways? Well, there are three reasons. Number one, consistency across all of my recommendations against the sidelines. If you're following along with this masterclass, you'd know that against the deferred Steinitz, I'm playing c3 and d4 next. Against the classical, I'm playing c3 and d4 next. Against g6, I'm playing c3 and d4 next. So if you want a more consistent repertoire against all of the sidelines, I think it makes sense to consider what happens if we play c3 anyways here. Why does the engine actually hate this? And this takes me to the second point, which is the only reason the engine dislikes c3 is because of one very concrete and very specific line that black has to know, starting with d5, which surrenders the center pawn here due to the pin. So black has to essentially just know this, right? They're not going to find this over the board. They have to be comfortable giving away the pawn, which becomes a permanent weakness in black's camp, and they have to know a very specific follow-up several moves deep. So I don't think your opponents will know this, and this is indeed corroborated by the fact that in the database, many people do not play d5. And the fourth point is that if they don't play d5, and let's say they just move the knight to g6, or they develop via g6 and bishop g7, then we retain the entire advantage that white would retain after playing the immediate d4 or castling or playing knight c3. So that's a couple of reasons why I'm playing c3 anyways. I think for the consistency, for the fact that we have a very specific plan, for the fact that it's black that has to really know exactly what to do to get a somewhat equal position, but even then, white is the one pushing. And the final point is that there's going to be so much transpositional value. Specifically, if they play g6 here, guess what? We're playing d4. There's too much pressure they have to take. And now after d5, we've seen this exact position in the previous chapter where they started by playing g6 on this move here. We reached the exact same position thanks to a different move order. And similarly in this position, after they play bishop g7, once again, we've reached this exact same position in the previous chapter. So all of this is to say that in this position, after against the Cozio, we play c3. g6 has absolutely no independent value. This is completely the same as the positions that we saw in the previous chapter. After d4, we have fully transposed. So what does this mean that we have to know? Well, after c3, of course, we're going to take a look at the critical move d5 that is trying to punish our c3 move. We're also going to look at the other way for them to develop their pieces, which is to move the knight out of the way instead of playing g6, and then develop the bishop along this diagonal, perhaps to b4, maybe to c5, maybe to e7. So those are kind of the two systems that we have to look at. I will note that throwing in a6 changes absolutely nothing. We simply move the bishop and they have the same choice. Knight to g6 here is the move to make. And after d4, we're going to get the same positions. They're going to give the check. We develop the knight. You're going to see these positions in a moment. The only difference is the pawn is still back on a7 and the bishop is back on b5. It doesn't change anything. So the benefit of the way that I'm recommending this move c3 is that we get to cut a lot of the theory we have to know, and really we only need to focus on these two moves. So let's start with d5, which is definitely the critical move here. So we're going to take the pawn, they're going to take, and queen e2 already poses a very concrete issue for them, right? Our plan is simply to take the pawn, control the center with d4, and establish an absolute bind in the center where it would be up material with complete center control, pressure along this diagonal, and the piece on c6. That would be a dream for us. And black has to do something, and it's very easy to play queen d5. It looks super strong defending and adding pressure, but it allows us to take and then play d4 using the pin, right? So queen to d5 actually doesn't address the issue of us striking with d4, and once we've established the center, the pawn on e4 is simply a weakness, and we can chip away at this weakness via f3 very soon, and later we could even try to win the weakness via bishop d5, as you see in this game here. So, okay, no surprise that white ended up being able to convert a very pleasant endgame, and in this position, black resigned. So going back, what I'm trying to say here is that queen d5, a supernatural way to try to hold together black center in this position here, it actually fails. The move they have to know, and I don't think they're going to find this, is bishop e6, giving us the pawn, but then bishop d5 winning back the pawn on g2. And their claim is that because they've wrecked our king side, we're not going to be able to castle, and our king is going to be in the center. But here's the thing, guys. We're going to play d4, right? They haven't addressed this second threat that we have of playing d4. And now it's actually their king, I argue, that is in a worse position, because the pressure along this diagonal means that it's always something that black has to worry about, giving the king sitting on e8. And further, this knight cannot move, because then there's going to be an issue with the king very much exposed given our queen. And if the knight can't move, the bishop can't move. So black has to, in this position, really contend with very serious issues when it comes to how they want to develop. And the only real way for them to deal with these issues is to play f6 and then camp the king on f7 to deal with the pressure along the e-file to make the knight able to move, to bring the bishop finally into the game. And it's actually the missing g2 pawn that enables our rook to enter the game very strongly. And you can see that after here, bishop e3 and then knight to d2, I argue that the king on f7 is far worse than our king on e1, and I don't think that's a very controversial take. And I think that the pieces that we have in the center, though they may not look all that assuming right now, I think they give us constant pressure. And black always has to watch out for the pawn coming to h5, the pawn coming to f5, our knight sort of jumping around. The king is a constant threat here, and I like our chances. But that's the best way for them to punish us, going in to a line that in the end they're moving voluntarily the king to f7. I don't think that black is going to know this. I don't think they're going to play d5 at all. I think they're playing knight g6 here. And again, this gives us everything we want. We strike with d4 here. We establish our center. They can give us a check, and it's true that they got their pieces out very quickly and very nicely, but we got the center. And unless they're willing to strike with d5, which perhaps in some cases they're going to need to do anyways, but it's difficult to do given our control over the center, we're just going to have a completely dominant position. So here, for example, after d6 to develop their bishop, we play h3, and we say that bishop has nowhere to go, right? If it comes to e6, there's going to be a small issue with d5. It can't come to g4, f5. It's going to have to develop very passively, unfortunately. And we can even the bishop has served its purpose, very much traumatizing black and giving it some really concrete issues along this diagonal. It can come back to our base on d3, enabling now some kingside pressure. And after h6, to stop the bishop from coming to g5, we simply put the rook on the open file. We can maneuver the queen and the knight into the king side, and f4, right? And it's again white who has all of the fun here due to their center. So knight to g6, I find that the knight on g6 isn't even a particularly strong piece. I think it's taken them a little bit of time to get their pieces into fine squares, and in that time we've been able to establish a very strong center. So I think white is doing totally fine here, and the game that I have filed up for you here indeed proves that. And the queen actually, in very ironic fashion, ends up getting trapped, as you saw on h4. So that's about it, guys. Just to summarize sort of the way that you can conceptualize our strategy against the Cozio defense, this is what I would say. We're playing c3, which objectively is not the best move, but they have to find a very unintuitive move, d5, to punish it. And even in the final position of the d5 lines, like I showed with queen e2, and then the rook coming in, and then d4 and bishop e3, I think it's black's king that is going to be a constant issue in the game. So they have to play d5. If they play knight g6, d4, they've surrendered their center, and this gives us the complete free hand to play for a quick kingside attack using our strong center as a launching pad to put some pressure on their king. And again, if they start in this position with g6, no independent value. If they play a6, no independent value either. I think it's a very handy way to deal with the Cozio, where you don't need to know that much theory, yet you're pretty much guaranteed fine positions. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Subscribe if you are new around here, like the video if you learned something from it, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.